Expedia and Visit Scotland invite you to come step into centuries of history that await in Scotland. Castles steeped in legend walk along cobblestone streets. Come share the warmth of stories passed down through generations. This is a place with a past that is fully present today and all yours to explore. Plan your Scottish escape today at expedia.com/Visit Scotland.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
This is the Tudors, Dynasty, and Beyond podcast. History with a twist. And now your host, Rebecca Larson.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm Rebecca Larson, and I'm very happy to welcome, for the first time with me at least, Dr. Michael Jones. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, Rebecca.
Yes, I've been doing this series, and I don't know if you've noticed, but I think you have. I've been doing this series on medieval kings with Matt Lewis. And recently we went through the reign of Edward III. I think we had to do it in two parts, and we only talked very briefly about the Black Prince. And I've gotten a lot of feedback from listeners that they wanted to know more. So that's why I invited you here today.
Okay.
And before, I was just going to say,
I'm up for it.
Before we get into it too far, since you are newer to the show, I would love it if you would just take a moment to kind of introduce yourself to everybody and let them know who you are and what you do.
Sure, a pleasure. So I'm Dr. Michael Jones. Mike is fine on this show. I did my thesis at the University of Bristol on the Beaufort family, a very interesting 15th century family, and the 100 Years' War, which of course we'll be coming back to for our subject today, but an earlier part of the 100 Years' War. I've written 13 books, ranging from the Middle Ages through to World War II, the Eastern Front. I'm particularly interested as a military historian in the psychology of warfare, what motivates people to fight, morale, and great commanders through the ages. I'm sort of my heart to some extent is in the late medieval, early modern period. My first book was on Margaret Beaufort, and I worked with Philippa Langley, so I wrote a book on the Battle of Bosworth, and then we worked together on the discovery of Richard III and wrote a book together called The King's Grave, the Search for Richard III, which then became a movie, The Lost King. So that was all very exciting. And I was really thrilled for the opportunity to do a book on the Black Prince, because he is such a fascinating man and the whole period is so extraordinary. So that's a bit about me. I think that's enough. I'll just add, I'm a fellow of the Royal Historical Society and a member of the British Commission for Military History. So that's enough.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I feel like one of the things I talk about a lot on this show is the military stuff, the wars. That has always been something that I just had a hard time gravitating toward. I couldn't find part of it that was interesting enough to kind of pull me in. But I would say over the last couple of years, it has become a little bit more of an interest. I feel like when you study history long enough, you have to really start looking outside of individuals and into the things that occurred during specific reigns. So I'm glad to have somebody like you on the show to help me out with this a little bit.
Well, sure, but let's be honest, military history can also be dull and off-putting. And I think a key way in is through people, through personalities. And I think people like the Black Prince open a door into an age and into an outlook, really. So the story of the Black Prince is far more than just a rehash of battles and campaigns. It's a window into a very fascinating world, in some respects similar to ours, but in others very different. And particularly this concept of chivalry, which is far more than just a military concept. It's a way of living. And one thing that everyone, including the Black Prince's enemies, the French, praised him for, was that he was seen as an embodiment of chivalry. And he also married for love. So I'm throwing in a few things for your audience to attract them. So it's not just going to be a dry rehearsal of facts and campaigns. We've got everything in this story.
Yes, I'm so excited to get into this. So I never know. I'm like, maybe we should just start at the beginning, because I feel like with Matt, we just kind of jumped right into the Battle of Crécy and didn't really get to learn too much about the Black Prince, or Edward. Maybe we could call him that too, before all of that, because obviously he was a young boy at one point and a young man before this battle. I think he was, what, 16 at the Battle of Crécy?
Yeah, he was 16, well remembered. But yes, and maybe we should just briefly start with his name, because the nickname that we all use, the Black Prince, was only really coined in the Tudor period. So the first reference to it is actually an antiquary, John Leyland, who was visiting the prince's tomb. And by the way, if any of you had the chance to go to Canterbury Cathedral and see his tomb, it's extraordinary. And also in the crypt beneath the tomb, you can see his achievements now on permanent display. You know, the gauntlet, the helm, the jupon that he'd have worn, etc., etc. So it's all very exciting. But yes, it was a nickname that evolved in the Tudor period. It first appeared in print in a chronicle of Richard Grafton in, I think, 1572. But the thing that ensured that it would stick with us is Shakespeare, who read Grafton, used it in his famous play Henry V, where Charles VI bemoans the terrible English and that prince of black memory, Prince of Wales. And so once he'd been called the Black Prince by Shakespeare, he's enshrined in our national consciousness forever. So I am going to call him the Black Prince, but in the 14th century, as you say, he was Edward, and Edward of Woodstock, not the music festival, but the royal palace where he was born. So yeah, would you like me to give a brief outline of his childhood? Quickly?
Gosh, yeah, you're making this easy for me. Go for it.
Okay. I'm here to be helpful, which is very chivalrous, of course. Yeah. So yes, he's the oldest child, the oldest son and oldest child of Edward III and his wife Philippa of Hainaut, and he's born in 1330. He's going to live for nearly 46 years, so he will predecease his father. So one of the things that's very fascinating is that he's a prince who never becomes king. He dies a year before his father, Edward III. So it's a kind of what if, because particularly since his sole surviving son, Richard of Bordeaux, who becomes Richard II, is not a successful king at all. So we're left wondering, oh my God, if his father had lived, what might have happened? So he's the oldest child and oldest son of Edward III. And his birth is very significant because his father, when the Black Prince, as we'll call him, was born, was only 18 himself. And although he was king in name, he was ruling in very unusual circumstances because his mother, Isabella, and her lover, Roger Mortimer, had taken the prince, and shortly afterwards, Philip of Hainaut came over to be married, had taken him over, deposed, and almost certainly subsequently killed Edward III's father, Edward II, although there's some question marks about that. And as a result, this 18-year-old king was being manipulated by a shadowy regime. And this sounds a bit Mills and Boon, if that expression translates, but it really was the birth of his son that seems to have galvanized Edward into sort of strutting his stuff, because very shortly afterwards he gathers a hit team of young knights, and they storm the residence where Isabel and Roger Mortimer are, arrest Mortimer, who's tried and executed, and Mum is sent off into exile, Castle Rising in Norfolk, and whoomph, the reign has really started. So I always think this is very important, because there's a particularly powerful bond, in my view, between Edward III and his oldest child and oldest son, which is both a blessing and a curse. So our young prince is born, and the ambition of his father is very evident, because the prince is not yet 7 when he is given his own miniature suit of armor, a wooden sword to practice with, even a campaign tent. These are his toys. I mean, he's learning on the job. And when his father, because the 100 Years' War, as we call it now, will start when the prince is 7 years old. So his dad is away a lot, and the prince is put in charge of a governing council. Now, he's not being asked to run the country at the age of 7, I'll clarify that, but equally he's surrounded by experienced advisors. But his dad's saying, I want you to start learning on the job. So there's a lot of ambition, and there's a good aspect to that, but there's also a lot of pressure as he's growing up. And one example of this is in 1340. So the prince is now approaching 10, and his father is about to sail off to fight a naval battle at Sluice, and the young prince goes to where the fleet is assembled, and literally gets on the main boat and says goodbye to his father. And then as he's going back, he leaves a host of messengers saying, can you find out the news? Is there any news of my dad? And of course, subsequently, Edward III will write letters to his son. And these letters are a bit like tabloid journalism. They're not just for the Black Prince, they're also for the nation to read. But nevertheless, they are personal, and they bring out the ambition, the excitement. In other words, what Edward III is, how he is shaping the prince, is we've gone through a period where, according to the chronicler Jean Lebel, England's military might. So when I say England, we're really looking at England and Wales, because Edward I conquered Wales, but not Scotland as an independent kingdom. But if I can use the shorthand, England, we were the laughing stock of Europe. We'd become so hopeless in war. We'd been trounced by the Scots at Bannockburn, which was a disastrous 2-day defeat in 1314. So our reputation had absolutely sunk. And the ambition of Edward III, and the ambition he's nurturing in his son, is to totally turn this around, to move from most laughed at to most feared. And that as a result, in the 1340s, as the prince is moving into his teens, the war is taken to the French. Edward III is now asserting a claim to the throne of France through his mother, who's still kind of shut up in exile, but nevertheless she's being used as a vehicle to assert this claim. And what's happening that's very interesting is a kind of military revolution. I mean, one has to be a bit careful with this term, but we're basically, reforms are being put into place to create a professional army. So in other words, there is now a proper system of recruitment where you contract out to great captains, they contract out to other people, their legal documents. You're supposed to show up with a certain number of men properly equipped, and there is a muster and a review. So in other words, if you try and show up with less people, and a few of them have only got one leg or are blind, you're going to be found out. And the ethos behind this is to shape up and get professional. And the other thing that's very interesting is that in terms of military tactics, and it's an absolute first, Edward III has the idea of using the great weapon, the longbow. This is going to be used in a totally different way. So previously, the missile-bearing part of an army was brought in at the beginning as a kind of appetizer to the main fighting. And then when the main body of troops engage, they get out of the way. And Edward III's vision, and it requires a lot of training and practice, is to incorporate the bowmen into the whole battle line. So they will take part in the fighting throughout. So the energy of this time must have been absolutely phenomenal. And basically, there'll be more sons and more children. But the Black Prince would have realized that his father is aspiring for him to almost in a way be a co-partner in this achievement. So that's very exciting, but it's also a lot of pressure that both of those things are true. Yeah. So that's his childhood and adolescence up to the Crécy campaign in 1346.
So one of the things that I am curious about, it seems like his relationship with his father took center stage, but how much influence did his mother have over him?
I'd say a lot. Philippa has come from a very chivalrous court, and later on, the premier chronicler of chivalry in the 14th century, Jean Froissart, also comes from Hainaut. So he comes over really because of Philippa. And Froissart is fascinated by the Black Prince, and he'll kind of elevate him, but then knock him down. And I'm going to elevate him and not knock him down. That's my plan. But I think I mean, both Edward III and Philip of Hainaut were fascinated by chivalry. But there is something in Philippa's influence. I mean, for better and for worse. So the good side of it is she absolutely knows how to work as a team with Edward III. They're a very effective power couple. She's devoted to him. And that sense of devotion would have certainly been a powerful influence on the prince. But she also, in her own right, embodies a kind of generosity of spirit, a largesse, a kind of instinctive understanding of how to behave at courts and with aristocrats that I think it has a very powerful effect on the prince. But also, she overspends massively. Now, I mean, Edward III will overspend early on in the 100 Years' War because he's trying to build up a war coalition. But to his credit, he also subsequently keeps his spending under, in budget, as it were. Whereas the Black Prince, rather like his mum, is always getting into debt because he's just so generous. So, by and large, a very positive influence. And Edward and Philippa were a very, very happy couple. So he's brought up in a court and in a family that is happy and harmonious for the most part. That's not always the story with the Plantagenets, but here, so far, so good.
Yeah, we're off to a good start so far, right?
Yes, yeah, we are definitely. It's not. I mean, spoiler alert. It's not always going to be happy, clappy, but at the moment, very good, and it's going to get better. So,
Yeah, yeah. So we're up to the Battle of Crécy, and like you said, at this time, Edward was only 16 years old. Uh, First, I'm kind of curious, like how unusual was it, if at all, that he was 16 at this time, and how significant of a role did he actually have during this?
well, again, a bit like the council post I mentioned, he's learning on the job. So the king's going to surround him, in this case, with experienced warriors. But he's given an honor position on the campaign, and the purpose of the campaign is to goad the French into battle, and also in the battle itself. So he's commanding the vanguard as the army marches through Normandy. It swings down towards Paris, and then heads back, burning and pillaging. So the French king has to do something. And it goes back to what almost certainly was a prepared battle position near the village of Crécy. And being in the vanguard is an honor position. And it also means you're going to get the brunt of the fighting. And in this case, it was particularly so because the topography of the battle, with the English army dismounting on a ridge, and as I was saying, combining men-at-arms and archers in a strong defensive position. But there was a feature of the terrain. Now the battle site of Crécy has been under dispute recently, but I and many others still favor the traditional site. So that's where I'm going to locate the action. There was an agricultural terrace partway through. So the French, who were primarily fighting a cavalry battle against dismounted troops, would be funneled, and they would be funneled right towards the Black Prince. So I'm not quite sure how much of this Edward III explained to his son, but he's both honoring him and making him a target, because the French are going to go, right, we can knock out the king's son. And they come very close to doing this, so that they break through the outer line. They then break through the prince's own personal bodyguard, about less than a meter away from the prince. I mean, the standard bearer, the standard is seized by the French. Someone else grabs it back. The prince himself is knocked to the ground, concussed, and picks himself up again. It's that desperate. And this is a very famous moment. So Edward III's command position, he's looking at events from a windmill, we're told, which is right on the ridge of Crécy. And someone rushes up to him, breathless messenger, and says, my lord, you must send reinforcements to your son, otherwise you'll be overwhelmed and killed. And Edward III, according to Froissart, makes this astonishing statement. If you want to look at tough love, 14th century style, he says, let him win his spurs, so win honor or die in the attempt. Well, I mean, nowadays that would be 20 years of therapy to recover from that. But at the time, I mean, of course, it's one of the great sound bites of medieval warfare. But what I like is that, according to another very reliable chronicler, Geoffrey the Baker, about a minute later, after producing this epic quote, Edward III thinks, God, what have I done? And quietly says to someone, look, I know I made that great comment, but send 40 of my best knights to help my son. And I love this because it actually, for me, catches the relationship, which is a mixture of being tough, strutting it out, but also this very deep love, this very deep affection. So as a result, these 40 knights do show up, and all turns out well. It's a thumping English victory against the French. So the prince, in a sense, does win his spurs, and in the aftermath of Crécy and the siege and capture of Calais, he becomes a famous figure on the European stage, and no one's taking the piss out of the English anymore. It's suddenly like, wow. So it's talk about a baptism of fire. It's a very big moment in his life.
Yeah, I love that story. Edward the Third's like up on a hill and he's like, "Oh shit, I changed my mind. I changed my mind."
What have I done? I think we've all been there. It's like, well, son, you've got to, oh God, what am I doing?
Yeah, exactly. This is my heir. I know I have some other sons too, but this is my heir and I am grooming
exactly.
him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he has got some other sons by this stage, but this one is his firstborn.
Yeah. Okay, so the Battle of Crécy is a huge success for him. Where does life take him after that? Is there quite a break before the next battle?
Well, no, it's kind of a roller coaster ride because we have, of course, the Black Death arriving in Europe, and it will reach England in September 1348. So, between a third and a half of the population of England, indeed Europe, is going to be wiped out. So it's equivalent, to sort of coming of age in a nuclear apocalypse. Members, the Black Prince will lose in the first outbreak of plague a sister who he was particularly fond of, and also a younger brother. But in this time of plague, the king and the Black Prince create in late 1348 an order of chivalry, the Order of the Garter, and they co-create it. So it's set up in a way. You have the king and the Prince of Wales, and the structure is followed to this very day. And then almost like two tournament teams of 12 on each side. So it's 24 Knights of the Garter who are chosen through merit, not rank, presided over by the king and by the Prince of Wales. So formulating this order of chivalry, which is going to be one of the greatest orders of chivalry in Europe, is a pretty extraordinary achievement in itself. And there's some remarkable escapades. One of them is, after a fair amount, I imagine, of heavy drinking, Edward III and the Prince and a group of Knights of the Garter hear the Calais that they've just won is about to be betrayed to the French. And rather than just scotch this plot, they let it proceed, but they come over and hide. So they let this French knight who is thinking, I'm going to be able to get in using bribes, they let him come in, and then they launch this big attack on him. But they get so carried away that Edward III is chasing them off, and he ends up on a kind of mud flat with about 30 men. And there's several hundred French who suddenly realize the King of England is stranded. But apparently all is well, because the Black Prince realizes what's going on and rides out and rescues his dad. So great letter Edward writes to his queen, Philippa, and says, all went well. And of course, my son should have the laurel because he rescued me. So at this stage, it's wonderful escapades. And there's another naval victory off the coast of Winchelsea. There's an amazing energy here in the naval battle. The ships are waiting in line, but there's a kind of lull. And everyone's looking up at the royal ship, Edward III's ship. And Sir John Chandos, who's one of a kind of a mentor to the Black Prince, but he's on the royal ship. He's just come back from Germany. Now, can you believe this? Everyone's sort of looking, what's the king going to do? Is he going to do this order? And the king says, let's get some musicians over here. Let's strike up a tune. Chandos, you've learned this new dance. Show us the moves. So suddenly everyone's this is like Drake carrying on playing bowls with the Spanish Armada moving along. It's just this wonderful moment of studied nonchalance. So they're in the midst of horror. the horror of the plague, which is now receding, there is also this incredible living ability to live life in the moment. So a remarkable time. But if I can move the story forward, there is a short period of truce, but back by 1355. So now the prince is, he's in his mid-20s, and he wants his own independent command, and he'll eventually get it. So he's made king's lieutenant in Gascony in 1355, and that autumn he leads a brutal raid across the south of France, basically from the Atlantic to the Mediterranean, really shaking the French. And as a result, the following year in 1356, a very grand plan is designed to launch 3 armies. Edward III is going to bring an army over to Calais, another nobleman in Brittany, Henry of Grosmont. He's going to start moving in with an army, and the Black Prince is going to come up from Gascony with a third, and they're going to trap the French king. Well, that grand plan goes totally pear-shaped. So in the summer of 1356, and this is a kind of crucial moment in the prince's life, he's got this army of Gascons who are our allies. We hold Gascony. This is a part of southwest France. And they're very good troops, by the way, but they're a bit reluctant to be leaving home and going right the way up to the Loire and past it. But nevertheless, off they go. But there's no sign of Dad. Basically, the diplomatic situation has changed, and he's decided, well, I'm not going to go over, but this message hasn't got through to his son. And there's been bad rain, so the Loire is flooded. So the Black Prince, instead of joining up with 2 other armies, finds he's on his own. And the new French king, now Jean II, not very popular. But when, again, it's a bit like being a target at Crécy, when the French realize that there's just this one army with the great famous Black Prince, they suddenly think, let's wipe the so-and-so out. So suddenly masses of French are joining the royal army with the sole purpose of wiping the prince out. And the prince is carefully moving back towards Poitiers, and he has to face a French army much, much bigger. And the result is a really extraordinary battle. So this battle is a battle 10 years after Crécy. It's in September 1356, the 19th, if we give it an exact date. So he's outright commander, but this is the battle that will really make him famous, because it's an incredibly tough battle. I mean, the French have wised up tactically. The English and Gascon army fights very well, but when the third line of the French comes up, this is commanded by the king, it's larger than this army that's been fighting and desperately fighting, rather like Cousin Westmoreland, in the play in Henry V. Someone quite close to the prince just goes, bloody hell, I've been fighting and we're all knackered, and now look at this. And the prince sort of says, he tries to he says, you knave, no battle is lost while I'm still in command. And the prince's mates are kind of going, nice words, but I think we're in big trouble here. And according to a biographer of the prince, the Chandos Herald, who is actually a witness to a subsequent campaign in Spain, but talked to people very close to the prince. At this moment, if you can imagine, this huge new line of French is coming up towards the position, and English and Gascons are thinking, bloody hell. The prince stops and prays out loud, and it's like the eye of the hurricane. It's like this moment of eerie calm in the midst of all this chaos. And when he finishes praying, suddenly there's this kind of lightning flash of inspiration, and they devise the most crazy battle plan. I mean, it's basically like showing up at Vegas and putting your entire fortune on the roulette wheel. So what happens is that one of the prince's closest followers says, look, I'll take a picked body of men round, and when we give the signal, I'll attack the French from behind. High risk in itself. And then normally the English always fight on foot. The order is given for the entire army, including bowmen, to mount up. Now, at this stage, I think a lot of the prince's soldiers were just thinking, what the hell is going on? But then another of the prince's close followers, James Audley, volunteers to lead this charge. And then suddenly everyone, when he rides ahead of the mounted force, suddenly everyone realizes what it's about. It's all or nothing. They are going to ride straight at the French king. And I think in a moment, the mood changed from kind of fear and confusion to absolute adrenalized hell, let's go for it. So this force that's ridden round, they'll charge, the signal is given, and then this entire force charges towards the French king with such velocity that they knock him sheer out of the battle line, the French battle line, into an adjacent meadow.
That's amazing.
And at this stage, and this comes from the funeral oration the Bishop of Rochester made. This was in September, later in 1376. Why I mention it is that the Bishop of Rochester had almost certainly talked this through with the prince. The prince was ill at this stage. If you'd done a rational head count, if you kind of had a drone observing what was going on or something, the English, when I say the English and Gascons were still outnumbered by about 10-1, but they were absolutely adrenalized, and the French were just thinking, what's happened to us? So they actually win and capture the French king, Jean II. So this is the Vegas jackpot, because with the French king in captivity, you can negotiate a very, very good deal. And a couple of personal touches that I really like is that after this extraordinary battle, the first thing the prince does is he sets up a beer tent. So he puts a banner up, and all his thirsty soldiers, it's like free beer on the prince. Well, I like that very much. But the thing that Froissart really liked was that in the banquet afterwards, so all these captured French, the king and the aristocrats are understandably looking rather miserable. The prince, who he's probably had his beer, but he must have been pretty hungry. He waits on the French king. So he says, please don't be so sad. The way you have fought today is of such honor. I mean, this is chivalry. This is rock and roll. And when Froissart talked to the French aristocrats, they were clearly very impressed. They were thinking, wow, So anyway, the prince waits on the King of France, and then he hears that James Audley, one of his best mates who led the charge, is still alive but badly wounded. So the prince rushes off. Please excuse me a moment. Nurses Audley, sort of bathes him. Audley kind of comes to, what happened, my lord? We won. And Audley is so overjoyed, he pulls through. And then the prince is back waiting for the second course. So, I mean, an amazing battle, and the combination of his courage in the battle and the banquet afterwards. At this stage, the prince becomes a kind of international European star, in terms of being a warrior, but also an embodiment of chivalry. So it's an amazing time, and it will lead in 1360, after another campaign, to a treaty of Bretigny, where the English, they give up their claim to the Kingdom of France for an incredible deal, where they hold Aquitaine. Now, Aquitaine is an enlarged Gascony. It's basically from Poitou to the Pyrenees. And for the first time ever, so this never happened in the Plantagenet period, never happened with Henry II, Aaron of Aquitaine, the English hold this outright. They do not have to bend the knee. They do not have to render homage to the French king. So this is an astonishing achievement. And you know what? Edward III gives the principality, he says, and the grant's amazing. In the capital letter, you have the prince kneeling before the king. the wording is very intimate. He said, "You have won this through the sweat of your campaigning and that tough summer. Kind of here's the reward." So in terms of everything, the 100 Years' War and also this father-son relationship, it's the absolute high point.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
You may think you know McDonald's drinks, but you don't know them like this. From fruity refreshers like the Strawberry Watermelon Refresher and the Mango Pineapple Refresher with popping boba, to crafted sodas like the Sprite Berry Blast with berry-flavored Sprite topped with cold foam. Who knew ice-cold drinks could be so fire? 6 all-new drinks are here. Try them all, now at McDonald's. Refreshers contain caffeine.
Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating.
How are we doing?
We're doing.
I hope this isn't too dull.
No, I'm enjoying this actually, because now I feel like we've gotten to the point where I've been like ready to ask you this question. This is one of the questions that I had prepared ahead of time. Was now we're up to the point where he finally gets married, and I'm so curious. Like, why did it take so long for him to get married? It seems like he was a lot older than usual.
Yeah, so he was the most eligible bachelor in Europe. And Edward III was being driven to distraction. He's trying to arrange all these, very good marriage alliances with foreign princesses. Yeah. I'm going to just come out and say it, Rebecca. The prince marries for love, and he goes for the woman he's always loved, Joan of Kent. And Joan of Kent is exceptionally attractive and rather, how to put it, she has this gift of kind of, she's always on the edge of scandal, but somehow retrieves through sheer charm. So at the time of the Order of the Garter, she's married to 2 different people at the same time, who are both in this order of chivalry, which would have added certain frisson to the Garter celebrations. It eventually gets sorted out. And she just has one husband, Sir Thomas Holland, who's a very brave, courageous knight. But in December 1360, Holland dies, almost certainly of plague, and the Black Prince moves in. Now, the French are absolutely fascinated because at this stage, the French, we're so much better than England. We fight better. We're the home of chivalry. Of course, we're far better in the ways of love. The English are kind of always second best there. We can cook better. You name it. Of
course, yeah.
And suddenly, it's like, what's happened? Because you've got this guy, the Black Prince, who's beaten them at Poitiers, and then has, and one story in the French Chronicle is all these kind of knights are saying, "Dear Black Prince, I've always loved Joan of Kent. Now she's free. Can you sort of, put in a word for me?" So apparently the Black Prince goes to see Joan and sort of, instead of doing all these testimonials for all these nights, he stops midway through and says, "Joan, I can't carry on anymore. The fact is, I really love you." And Joan goes, "What a relief, because I love you too." Now, whether this was true or not, I mean, this is like, the French are just going, wow, this is extraordinary. and they are a very loving couple. I mean, I'll put it like this. I think the prince was totally in love, and I think Joan loved him, although she had outlived the prince and then asked to be buried by her first husband, Sir Thomas Holland, which suggests that Thomas Holland was the biggest love of her life, but in Stamford in Lincolnshire. But Joan is, I mean, when the Black Prince and Joan go over to Aquitaine as prince and princess, they are the European power couple. They are absolutely extraordinary. And their court, I mean, it's magnificent. Again, we're seeing quite a bit of overspending because both of them love their bling. And Joan of Kent creates a whole new fashion trend, which is very risque, but again, she pulls it off brilliantly, where she dresses basically like the whores who follow the routier, the freelancing captains around during the 100 Years' War. So this is showing a lot of cleavage. This is, a lot of bling and hair, but she just stops on the side of decency, and everyone loves it and copies it. So you have the most, if I can give you one story that I think captures it, when they're touring Aquitaine, they were receiving homage, but they're also showing the magnificence of their court. And Froissart at this stage said this court was so entrancing. It was the most entrancing court in Europe. There's one moment where there is a very fascinating nobleman called Gaston Fabus, the Count of Foix, and he is like a rock star. I mean, he probably looked a bit like Robert Plant in Led Zeppelin when Led Zeppelin were in their prime. He's got this mane of blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and he really rocks it. He he's regaling the dinner table with stories. I went reindeer hunting up in the north. I fought on this crusade against Lithuania or something. And then on his way back, this is a time of truce, he and another companion, Jean de Grailly, this is the guy who led that crazy charge in the rear of the French at Poitiers, they rescue all these damsels in distress. Incidentally, these are damsels in distress that the Dauphin Charles, the future Charles V, has unwisely sent out of Paris to somewhere else, thinking it's a safe haven. When the peasants get to hear that all these attractive aristocratic women, they divert 10,000 rather randy peasants show up at this town of Meur, and the townspeople who've sworn to defend them with their life then have second thoughts and let all these peasants in. So it's not looking good for all these beautiful women. But Gaston Fabus gets to hear of it with his companions, and they form up on the bridge, so they're, properly armor, war horses, incredibly well trained, and they just keep mowing the peasants down. So they've just saved all these damsels in distress. This is the ultimate dinner table prestige. And the Black Prince and Joan know what Gaston Fabus is about. So the prince, if you can imagine, is at the head of the table, and Joan is opposite Fabus. And when he's finished his little story, she shows him quite a lot of cleavage and says, well, since you're such a wonderful chivalrous hero, you won't mind a favor being asked of you from another damsel. And Gaston Fabus is a bit suspicious, so he said, what might that be? And Joan says, well, you have a nobleman, this is John Count of Armagnac, that my husband really needs to work with in Aquitaine, but his ransom is just too high. Gaston Fabus immediately stiffens. Well, that's out of the question. and Joan is not put off at all. So she leans forward more and allows Gaston to see her entire cleavage and just says, well, a knight of such renown as yours, I'm sure, will consider it. And at this point, Gaston Fabus thinks, I better check what the prince thinks of all that. And he sees the prince is beaming, and he just thinks, those so-and-sos, they've outmaneuvered me, and he bursts out laughing. And at this point, 20,000 gold écus are knocked off the ransom. And then the prince speaks to everyone and says, I think Gaston Fabus deserves some reward. And it's this kind, they're the ultimate power couple, and they are an entrancing couple and an entrancing court. So I would say that this is the absolute zenith, the high point of the prince's life. He's in love. He'll have 2 kids, Edward of Angoulême, who will sadly die quite young, and then Richard of Bordeaux. He's rocking it. everything looks amazing.
Yeah.
But as you know, as so often is the case, it's not going to last. But there you are. So far, it's wonderful.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is, like you said, it's like the pinnacle. Everybody's like, the future looks so bright. This is our future king and future queen. We're looking forward to it. Then what happens?
So in the Middle Ages, they had this idea of the Wheel of Fortune, which is when you get to the absolute zenith, you are the closest to absolute disaster. That's a bit scary, isn't it? But they really believe this. And the Black Prince's life is a total example of this fortune's wheel, because he moves from being top of the world to absolutely at rock bottom so fast. It's a complicated story, and I'm mindful of time, but ostensibly during a period of truce that he's kind of pressured, this is the argument I put forward in my book, to support the most unsavory character in Spain. This is the King of Castile, who is known as Pedro the Cruel. He's a total psychopath. He's widely suspected of murdering his wife. He murders his half-brother halfway through a banquet and insists on leaving the corpse in front of him while everyone finishes their meal. And his coup de grace is, as he's being chased off the throne, he murders the Archbishop of Santiago de Compostela. So this is another kind of Becket situation on consecrated ground. So he's kind of arriving at the Black Prince's court with blood dripping off him. He's excommunicated. He's an excommunicant, and he's the last person in the world the prince would want to be associated with. But there is a treaty in place, and his father, my argument is that at the end of the day, this is the start of the rift between father and son. Very, very sadly, he says, no, look, for strategic reasons, you must support him. And the prince is saying, but this is the last thing in terms of chivalry, but he's kind of forced to do it. He wins a great victory at Nájera, writes a very lovely letter to Joan of Kent afterwards, calling her his sweetheart. But everything goes wrong very quickly. The campaign has nearly bankrupted Gascony, and Pedro reneges on his promise to repay, and so a tax has to be put into place. The army comes back with dysentery. The prince himself the following year becomes very ill, and it's an illness he'll never shake off. I personally think it was rectal cancer. Certainly by the autumn of 1368, he's periodically stretcher bound. And the French king, who's now Charles V, suddenly sees this golden opportunity. So he encourages certain Gascon noblemen to revolt, and then the war breaks out again. And it now goes wrong and goes badly very, very quickly for the English. So it all starts going wrong. And the Black Prince will leave France at the beginning of 1371. But two things I would want to mention briefly, but importantly, Froissart has now decided to do a hatchet job on the prince and accuses him that in September 1370 of an awful massacre at a town called Limoges. Basically, Limoges had been loyal to the prince and then changed its mind. And Froissart has the stretcher-bound prince in this kind of cruel anger, ordering the murder of 3,000 French civilians. And in my book, I spend a lot of time in the text and appendix refuting this. I don't think it happened at all. But it's a terrible, if you like, stain that is introduced on the prince's reputation. And then Edward of Angoulême, his oldest son, dies very suddenly. At this point, it's too much for the prince, and he'll return, and he'll live the last part of his life with these, this terrible illness. Moments when he sort of recovers some measure of health and then becomes ill again. But finally, in the summer of 1376. He's very close to death. And there's a very moving reconciliation. He's dying at his royal palace in Kennington, and his father asks him to come to Westminster, the Palace of Westminster, so he can nurse his son personally. And he also, all credit to him, pays off his son's very substantial debts. Mm-hmm. So at the end, there's a moment of happiness, but it's a very, very sad change in fortunes and very dramatic.
Yeah. You can't help but wonder, how would things have been different had he lived and we didn't have Richard II?
Well, they couldn't have been much worse. The thing about Richard, so, it's a bit like when we have Charles I, and he was the younger, so his older brother Henry was the star and was being groomed to be an extraordinary king. But instead we had the shy, stuttering Charles, who was always trying to big himself up, but never really worked. And Richard II, when Edward of Angoulême was born in 1365, it was celebrated by a tournament with everyone coming all over Europe. Richard of Bordeaux was born prematurely, and all he knew of his father was a kind of sickness and death. And it's a totally different, he never knew his father in his pomp, so he reveres his father. And of course, the one respect where the prince's will is changed, is his instructions to change, is the prince is not buried in the crypt, but in the actual body of the cathedral, as close as possible to the shrine of Thomas à Becket. And this is Richard II revering his father. He wants him on the pilgrimage route. But he has never seen the model of government, the model of being a warrior that made the prince so famous, and he just can't do it. So I don't think it could be worse. The big thing the prince would have had to have done as king is to get his spending in check. But if he'd done that, he had the instinctive rapport with the aristocracy, which was so vital, and which his son, unfortunately, didn't have at all. And he also commanded their respect because of his innate sense of chivalry. And this is the binding glue in terms of kingship in the late Middle Ages.
Get business done with the new American Express Graphite Business Cash Unlimited card. With unlimited 2% cash back on all eligible purchases, unlimited 5% cash back on flights and prepaid hotels booked through American Express Travel Online, and a flexible spending capacity that can grow with your business, you'll have the confidence to keep building. Apply today and earn a welcome offer of $1,500 cash back after you spend $50,000 in qualifying purchases on your new card within the first 6 months of card membership. Terms apply. Learn more at go.amex/graphite.
Yeah, I guess it goes to show how much influence a father can have over his son if he has enough time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Very, very good point, Rebecca. A timeless point.
It is, isn't it? Well, I think the last thing I want to ask you is, this is just one of those fun type questions, but if you could spend one day with the Black Prince at any moment in his life, which day would you choose and what would you want to ask him?
So I guess the obvious one is the banquet after Poitiers, but I'm not going to choose that because you'd just be too busy. You'd say, Mike, thank you for traveling back in time, but I've just got to serve the French king again, and Audley's over there, and so I'd never get a chance. So what I would choose is the Christmas celebrations at Berkhamsted Castle. Berkhamsted Castle is principal residence of the Black Prince, and this is Christmas 1361. So to set the scene, the prince is now married. The marriage took place at Windsor in October, and the king has kind of acquiesced to the marriage. He thought, bloody hell, I'd have liked something different, but I can't say no to the victor of Poitiers. And the prince and Joan of Kent, and Edward III is fond of Joan of Kent, but they invite mum and dad over, Prince's mum and dad over for Christmas. And I think the prince isn't quite sure how it's going to go. And Froissart tells us that it's a brilliant occasion as well. The thing I really love is that by sort of maybe the 28th of December. It's clearly rocking. The whole thing is rocking. The prince sends a servant off to London, in the middle of the Christmas season to get a whole load of liveries, because everyone's staying and having so much fun that there's going to be another big party. And I think this must have been just such a happy occasion. There's a lull in the fighting. The prince is married for love, and he'd also have a bit of time to chat to me. And what I would ask him would be, which is the theme of my book, is, I'd say to him, your reputation as a warrior we all know about, but in terms of your piety, do you genuinely believe, just talking to me, that you are protected by God? Because I think this idea of divine protection, which the prince felt he had, both Crécy and Poitiers, and lost by helping an excommunicant, by Pedro the Cruel, which is why it all went wrong, is the key to understanding him. But I'd like to hear it from his own mouth. So that's what I'd like to ask him.
Yeah. That's great. If we could do these things, right? If only we could travel back in time for a day.
Well, yes. And how wonderful that would be. As long as one, sort of, hopefully something doesn't go wrong with the time machine.
Exactly.
One ends up in a plague-stricken village.
Worst case scenario, right?
Yeah, there'd have to be some kind of emergency escape drill. Yes,
You have a random abort button somewhere.
Yes, exactly. Or if I say the wrong thing and the Black Prince gets really angry with me, I can also just, it's like, nice talking to you, mate. But I kind of feel I know him well enough to pick up, when, what and when to say things.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, I know you have the book next to you. Can you show everybody the book and let us know?
Yes, sure.
There it is. Such a beautiful cover, too.
Thank you so much.
The Black
Prince.
Black
Prince, yeah. Part of my heart is in that book. I mean, I think, that part of us is in every book, but it was a particularly powerful experience writing it. So I'm very happy and proud to have had the opportunity to do a biography of someone as extraordinary. I mean, he had his faults. He's very human, but he's also inspiring and very engaging as well, with a particularly mischievous sense of humor, which I'm very fond of.
Yeah, I am so appreciative to you, Mike, for coming on the show today.
It's a big pleasure.
Teaching us more. And if you guys are interested in his books, I'll definitely put some links in the show notes. I'm presuming they're available everywhere.
Yes, Amazon, very definitely. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
And all good bookshops.
Wonderful. Do you have any talks coming up that people who are in the UK can come to?
Yeah, I mean, my next big talk. So we have a very big medieval festival. I mean, this is the summer of medieval festivals, so we have some wonderful ones. But our biggest one is at Tewkesbury. It's an absolutely incredible festival over 2 days. And on the Friday, Matt Lewis is giving a talk. And on the Saturday, I'm giving a talk. And the person I'm giving a talk on is Edmund Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, who fought and died at the Battle of Tewkesbury. So it's a lot, again, about, powerful battle and vindicating a reputation. So my talk is on the Saturday, the 11th of July, in the middle of this marvelous festival. And it's the chance to look at another remarkable figure. I'm a great fan of Edmund Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, indeed many of the Beaufort family. And it's an extraordinary story that I think deserves to come to light. So it's a vindication, really, of someone else whose reputation I think has been wrongly besmirched. So that's my next big talk. I'm very excited to be doing it at that time and at that venue.
Yeah, I'm sorry that you have to see Matt Lewis.
You're not sorry at all. He's great. I his podcast, Gone Medieval, we did something on the Black Prince. It was absolutely brilliant because he is so good at this. You know that very well.
Yes, I enjoy him so much. He's got a great sense of humor too that I think people don't realize.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
he's brilliant. He's great fun to work with.
Yes, he truly is. Well, Dr. Michael,
I hope you'll be listening, Matt.
I'll send this clip to him where you just say he's brilliant. He is brilliant.
Send that to him, please do, with my fond regards.
Most definitely. Well, Dr. Michael Jones, thank you so much for joining me again today. I really appreciate it.
Big pleasure, Rebecca. Have a brilliant day. You take care.
Thank you. And that concludes another episode of the Tudors Dynasty and Beyond podcast. This podcast would not be possible without the wonderful support of my generous Patreon patrons. If you'd like to become a patron, you get commercial-free episodes, early access, and exclusive content. Head over to Patreon, that's patreon.com/Tudors Dynasty for more information. Until next time,